This Hebrew month is the month of Shvat. Um, sorry for the background noise here. We're not near Rosh Chodesh because we were a little bit, it coincided with some other things. Next Monday is Martin Luther King Day, which happens this year to fall out on Tu B'Shvat. So the exciting kind of day on this month's calendar is the day of Tu B'Shvat, the 15th. Tu is Tes and then the Vav. That's how we write 15 in Hebrew. And Tu B'Shvat this year falls out on Martin Luther King Day. And so we'd like to try to frame the conversations about the essence of this month of Shvat around social change and social justice, which is the series on seasonal resistance. I want to give a couple of quick introductions, and then we're going to go see a bunch of different texts and be in conversation about what might be unique this year. Time, like we've said many times, is itself a construction. It is itself a creation. So when we think about the different months and the different days within the different months and the different days of the weeks within the calendar, today they're separate, meaning we have 12 distinct months. This year we have 13 months because there are two others, it's a leap year. But before time was created, and I know this is a difficult concept, before time was created, you had the essence of each of the months existing in a unified singular space. We have time zones today that all exist simultaneously, in that at this moment, it's 6 o'clock on the East Coast, but it's 5 o'clock in other places, it's 4 o'clock, right? And they exist as a singular moment spread out across the different time zones. If that makes sense to you, that it can still be morning in one place and night somewhere else. So this is like that, but instead of different hours, it's different months. Oh. They all happened simultaneously, not spread out over time or space, but they all existed in one moment.
I have to interrupt you.
Ruthie!
My Zoom, class Zoom. And I'll get back to you, my darling friend. You too. Thank you. Mwah.
Ruthie, we love you too. I think you're unmuted though. Okay, fantastic, friends. Okay, I thought I was being interrupted, but I wasn't. Okay, the reason why this is important in particular is because Tu B'Shvat itself represents more than just the day itself, but sees itself in a dynamic relationship, a preparatory moment in relationship to other days on the calendar. That's the first preface. We're going to say more about it in the sources. And let's take a look at some of those sources, and we will have plenty of time to discuss. One other, I knew there were two and I forgot the second. The second introduction briefly that I wanted to give is that in the mystical tradition, when things are in order, it skews towards the midas harachmim, towards the attribute of mercy. Things can be broken and going in the right way, but because you're doing it in the right way, there's a certain compassion. There's like, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and so like we can be forgiving of the fact that life happens. When things are out of order, and particular when they're in the reverse order, the mystics understand that as midas hadin, that you're going to deviate from the norm, so then it's much more exacting. Why are you doing that which is backwards, right? So, okay, if there's a reason, there's a reason. But we hold a person and the world more accountable. We said in all of the previous times that every month has a corresponding verse that has the order of the four-letter name of God in order. It's spelled Yud and then Hey, Vav and then Hey. So every month has a verse that has words that start, 4 words that start in some sort of mixture of that order. Sometimes it's completely in the right way, sometimes it's in the backwards. Sometimes it's mixed up. You have 4 letters. There's only this number of permutations. The one for Shvat has the first 2 letters in the reverse order. So instead of Yud and then Hey, it's Hey and then Yud. But the third and the fourth letter, the second half of the word, are in the right order. And the rabbis understand this as one of the unique features of Tu B'Shvat, the 15th of the month, as being one of the Rosh Hashanahs, one of the 4, and we're going to see inside the other 3. But it's the only one that is in the 15th of the month, in the middle of the month. All of the other ones are on the 1st of the month, like the famous Rosh Hashanah of Tishrei is on the 1st of the month. This is on the 15th of the month. And it takes kind of the first half of the month, which is in the reverse order, still having this attribute of judgment, to get to Tu B'Shvat, which for us in this conversation is going to be the pivotal shift and turnabout to mercy, which is going to be emblematic of the holiday and of the texture of the time of the month, and for the work of social justice, which is going to be about stirring up the system so that which is on the bottom comes to the top, and that which is on the top goes to the bottom. This will make a lot more sense in the sources. With the sources, without this making this part will be harder to make sense. Okay, the first source I want to share with you is the Bnei Yissaschar. So it's 19th century, and really the first one to write on the months in this kind of Hasidic way. And so it's found in Sefaria. Some of them have translations, some of them don't. To find this, it's in Shvat, Discourse 1. There's only 2, and it's the first one within. And he explains that the tziruf, the manipulation of the letters, of the shame of God's name, of this month is, like we said, it's the Yud and the Hey in the reverse order. And it comes Mirashi Tevis, from the first word of each line of the verse. And this verse is Leviticus 27:33. So 27:33. This is on the topic of tithing, particularly that of animals. There's a certain amount that the 10th language of tithing goes to the temple, etc. So the verse says, all the tithes of the herd or flock, all that passes under the shepherd's staff, each 10th one shall be holy to the Lord. So it continues in verse 34, one must not look out for the good as against bad or make substitutions for it. For if one might make substitutions for it, then it and its substitute shall be both holy, it cannot be redeemed. Meaning, if a person's favorite cow is designated to the temple, and a person says, oh, I'm going to redeem my favorite cow with my least favorite cow, right, to be able to keep my favorite cow, it doesn't work that way. And if a person tried, they both go off to the temple. So you'll notice here the letter Hey and the letter Yud. So it should be Yud and then Hey, and then Vav and then Hey. So the first letter of these 4 words correspond to this month, according to the Arizal and others, that this month speaks to substitutions, that there's a shifting of one thing which is not good, right? Subjectively not good. In our case, it'll be objectively not good. Here in this verse, it's subjective, meaning you as an individual or as a society says, this is better than that. And as a result, we want to prioritize this over that. And the verse says, as a correction, it doesn't work that way. You don't get to artificially inflate the value of one over another, that there's actually an order to the world that has nothing to do with what you think is superior. So that's the verse that corresponds to this month, is in dealing with the tension between what is, from God's perspective, the order, in contrast to the artificial manipulation of a social construction of order. Okay, we'll put a small pin in that. The very first Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah teaches that there are four Rosh Hashanahs. Arba Rosh Hashanah Haim, there are 4 Rosh Hashanahs, Be'echad, B'Nisan, Rosh Hashanah, L'Malachim, L'Regalim. The first one is the one on the 1st of Nisan, and that is for the beginning of the calendar for kings, which means when we think about the first year of a king's reign, if they started in Adar, which is the month before Nisan, So when it comes to Nisan, it's already the second year. It's like that's the cutoff. So too for festivals, the calendar year, not for the years, but for the months, starts with Nisan. Nisan is the very first This is the very first month within the calendar month. So in the our calendar, the first month is January. Nisan is the first month. So it happens to be in the secular calendar, January 1st also is the beginning of the new year. So that's not true in the Jewish calendar. The first of Tishrei is a new year, but the first of Nisan is the beginning of counting the months. So Nisan is the first month for festivals and for kings. Echad be'elul, Rosh Hashanah l'maiser behema, tithing of animals, that happens at the beginning of Elul. Rabbi Elazar and Rav Shimon Oivrim be'echad b'Tishrei. There's an internal dispute about Tishrei, and the animals, but everybody agrees be'echad b'Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah l'shanim. The Rosh Hashanah that we know as Rosh Hashanah, the festival called Rosh Hashanah, is on the first of the day of the month of Tishrei, and that's when we, for years. Also Shemitah, like today, the sabbatical year, because the function of years. Yovlos, the Jubilee year, the Yovel, which is after 50, and also for certain types of pruning and cutting for vegetables. Okay. Be'echad b'Shvat. So up until now, we have 3 different months. On the first of the month, everybody agrees, at least on the date. There's dispute what's included in it, but these 3, everybody agrees. Be'echad b'Shvat, on the first of the month of Shvat, which was last week, Rosh Hashanah le'ilon, that is the festival, the Rosh Hashanah for the tree. Kedivrei Beis Shammai, according to Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says, Bechamisha Aser Bay. That it's not on the 1st, it's on the 15th. Okay, so there's a dispute here. There are other things which are really interesting. The Elon is in the singular, where everything else here is in the plural for the festivals, for the kings, for the tithing, for the Shemitahs in the plural, Yovlos is in the plural, the vegetables, everything here is in the plural. But for Rosh Hashanah, it's for the singular tree. It's interesting, it's noteworthy. We know that Beis Shammai in rabbinic tradition is more strict, but also has more of an attachment and alignment with the world of ideas. There's something purist, there's something pure on a certain plane in the theoretical. Because in the theoretical, it's perfect, right? Like once you're thinking about it, think about it in the most ideal way. It's only in the world of action, right, where you need to have this kind of forgiveness and compassion, which is the space where Hillel, exists. Hillel occupies the space of being a human in this world, and being a human in this world requires compassion and forgiveness and mercy. So the first of the month goes according to Shammai and does correspond with a particular aspect of judgment, where Hillel on the 15th of the month represents kind of the fullness, right? If we think about the new moon as being the indicator of the new month, there's very little there. As soon as there's a sliver, that's already the new month. Because in the world of ideas, right? So it's all conceptual. So there's a little bit of a moon. It's the new moon, and like we can envision, we can project, we can imagine. That's that space. And that space assumes that whatever we envision, whatever the ideal is, that's how it's going to be in the real world. Because you're only doing this because it's the right thing to do. So you'll do the right thing, and it's a pretty narrow space. 15 within the Jewish tradition, I think we've spoken about this, represents progress. It represents the fullness. It's 2 weeks into the month. The month is now full because it takes time to reach perfection. You don't get there overnight, right? To reflect the most amount of light requires the most amount of work to be able to do the thing. There are 15 steps in the Haggadah, there are 15 steps in the temple, right? 15 represents, it's the 15th letter in the Hebrew alphabet. It's the letter Samech. I think we spoke about this maybe even last time. So there is a deeper connection between this parallel binary of Midas Hadin and Midas Harachamim, of the mercy and the strictness, for the month of Nisan, which is, sorry, I pointed to the wrong one, to the month of Tishrei, and Tu B'Shvat and the month of Nisan. These are all connected. These are connected in a very interesting text, which is a Gemara later on in Rosh Hashanah. Just to go through some of the sources quickly, the reason why the 15th of Shvat is a Rosh Hashanah, like what's significant about the 15th of Shvat? I mean, there might be snow on the ground here, but Rashi explains, I don't know if this is available, it doesn't look like this is available in English, but Rashi explains that on the 15th of the month, Va'allah hasaraf bi'ilanois, right? That even though it's a time where the fruit hasn't formed yet, it's the moment where the sap starts to emerge and starts to elevate, right? It starts coming up through the tree on the 15th of Shvat, which again is thematic. It's about that which is gumming down from the underneath and coming up. In fact, the word Elon and Ilanos, right? Ilanos is the plural here. I'll highlight it. Ilanos, this word, which is how we describe Tu B'Shvat, it's Chag HaIlanot, Chag HaIlanos. This word does not appear anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. Doesn't appear anywhere in Tanakh, not in the prophets, not in the writings, at least not explicitly. The only constellation in all of Tanakh of these 6 letters is in Exodus 14, verse 27. We always read this around Tu B'Shvat. I think we read this next week. I think. If it's not next week, it's this week. I have to look in the Chumash. But it's always around Tu B'Shvat. It's either the week of or the week after. This is about the splitting of the sea. Vayatza Moshe es yodai al hayam. Moses, extends his hand over the thing, over the sea. Vayashav hayam lifnois baker. And here's our word, le'esonoi. It's the letters of the word ilanot, but it's the word le'esono. So here it says the sea returned to its normal state. Others translate to its natural power. So, right, the sea splits, the Egyptians are in, we're out, and now the sea is crashing in. The Egyptians fled as it approached, but the Lord hurled the Egyptians into the sea. All of this requires an explanation, and the Talmud says this is able to be understood as a language of condition, litanai, that God in the creation of the world made a deal with the sea, that I'm going to create you on the condition that when the Egyptians come, right, and the Israelites come, you're going to split and then you're going to go in. So this was, from the beginning of creation, the plan. Rashi explains here on the verse, in kind of graphic detail, what does it mean that God kind of returned everything to its natural state? As a person empties out a pot, turning what is on top underneath and what is underneath on top, right? And so you have here the oppressors becoming subjugated, those who were oppressed, the Israelites, coming out. And Rashi goes on to why this was important, quoting Mechilta. But here, li'itanoi, to its original strength. So there's a move here in the verse that the mystics understand is an allusion to the festival of the trees. What is the festival of the trees? It is taking that which has been suppressed, whether it's the sap in the tree coming up, whether it's these narratives that we're reading, whether it's about the injustice of humanity, or if it's really just reminding even a person, even with animals, that you cannot substitute for that which has a particular place because you want to manipulate the place that things occupy. I know we're going through these sources quickly. I promise there's going to be time to discuss and to ask clarifying questions. I want to say one more important point, and then we're going to bring it back together. Connecting the different days in the Mishnah and Rosh Hashanah can be achieved in the following interesting way, which is through a Gemara in Saita. We're going to see here two interesting texts. There is a dispute when the world was created. Rabbi Yeshua Omer ben Nisan Nivra Olam. Rabbi Yeshua says the world was created on the first of the month of Nisan. And he says, Nisan, the patriarchs were born, and Nisan, the patriarchs died. On Passover, Isaac was born. On Rosh Hashanah, Sarah, Rachel, and Hannah were remembered. On Rosh Hashanah, Joseph came out of the prison. On Rosh Hashanah, our forefathers' slavery in Egypt ceased. And in Nisan, the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt. And in Nisan, in the future, will be redeemed again. So this is Rabbi Yoshua, who says that the world was created on Nisan, which means when we think about Rosh Hashanah, like the dipping the apples in the honey, according to Rabbi Yoshua, you should be dipping the apples in the honey on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Rabbi Lazar disagrees. Rabbi Lazar says that the world was created in the month of Tishrei. He actually says this above. Was Rabbi Lazar Omer b'Tishrei nivra ha'olam. Rabbi Lazar says that Tishrei, the world was created. In Tishrei, the patriarchs were born. In Tishrei, the patriarchs died. On Passover, Isaac was born. On Rosh Hashanah, the rest I think is basically the same. And then Rabbi Yeshua disagrees, and they each bring proofs. Tosfos says that both Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Lazar are correct. And this is a pretty classic rabbinic move. We hate having disputes in the reality of something. It's known as the machlokes in the Metzias. One person says, it's hot. One person says it's cold. So we say, okay, someone should touch it, right? Someone should take the temperature. Like, you can't be fighting about the reality of something. It's not juicy. It's not interesting. So when it's something that's factual, when was the world created? So how do you have a dispute about that? So here it's a little bit better. We weren't there, so we have maybe different traditions. The way the rabbis understand this is that before the world was created within time, like we have now, there was an aspect of the world that's created on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. There's an aspect of the world which is created on Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. And it shouldn't be too difficult to grasp that there's an aspect of din. The Rosh Hashanah that we have today, which is Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, that's the day of judgment, right? That is the birthday of the world where the whole world comes before God and is judged. That is Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. There's an aspect of the world being created through mercy, right? Where God intervenes and redeems us from Egypt, right? Which is only because God was merciful, that existed, that the world was created with this attribute of mercy on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. The part that connects this to Tu B'Shvat is also the part that connects this to Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av, the 15th of the month of Av, is also a day that involves trees, it involves dating, it involves a lot of things that also connect to Tu B'Shvat, but it was the day that they would stop chopping the wood for the Mizbeach. We're not going to focus on Tu B'Av, we're going to talk about Tu B'Shvat, but the reason why this is important for us is that the Gemara tells us in Saita, and this B'li Neder will be the last source before we come back, is that Rabbi Yehuda says, this is the Gemara in Saita at the very beginning, 2a, it's the first page of the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Arbayim Yom Kodim Yitziras Havlad, that 40 days before a fetus is formed, there's a baskol that comes out, there's this heavenly voice, and then that comes out that makes in a preparatory act. It's not just about marriage or children, it's also this house is going to belong to this person, this field, right? So the Gemara here is talking about to what extent are things predestined. It's a different conversation about predestination, but the mystics, the Bnei Yissaschar in particular, says that just like by the formation of a person, 40 days before, there's this divine kind of utterance, so too, 40 days before the creation of the world, right, there is also going to be this preparatory kind of act. Now, if you do the math, the way this works is as follows. Our Rosh Hashanah is not the first day of creation, because our Rosh Hashanah in Tishrei celebrates the creation of the world as marked by the creation of humanity. So it's actually the sixth day in the 6-day narrative of creation, which means that the world being created, according to the one who says that it was created in Tishrei, what it really means is that the first day of creation was on the 25th day of the month of Elul. Okay, so when we think about the day in which the world was really created, it wasn't on Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. That's when Adam and Eve were created, and they were created on the 6th day. So the 25th of Elul was really the first day of creation. 40 days before the 25th of Elul, if you do the math, is Tu B'Av, the 15th of the month of Av. The same thing is true for the one who says that the world was created in Tishrei, that the world was created on, not Tishrei, Nisan. According to the one who says that the world was created on Nisan, what that means is that Adam and Eve were created on Nisan, on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. You go back to the 25th day of the month of Adar, which is just, right, if they're created on the 6th day of creation, the first day of creation is the 25th of Adar, and 40 days from the creation of the world puts you exactly on Tu B'Av, Tu B'Shvat. So what comes out is that Tu B'Shvat itself is the preparatory act for the fulfillment of a creation, and according to this, a recreation, because the world already was created through this Midas Hadin in Tishrei. There's a dispute which one happened first. Obviously, we paskin one way as the dominant Rosh Hashanah, but there's aspects of that both opinions agree to. So what comes out is that Tu B'Shvat, right, which is the birthday of the tree, and one last little source here, is that it's not just the source of the tree, but there's an allusion to this, that Ki Ha'adam, that the person, Eitz HaSoda, that a person is also called a tree of the field. There's a lot more mystical things to speak about here that we'll save for after. But when we think about being the birthday of the tree, it's not just the birthday of trees. It's the birthday of the world, right, of humanity, of people being able to have the virtues of the tree, in that society is meant to be a tree of life. It's meant to be the system by which that which is oppressed, that which is subverted, that which is below the surface finds elevation and support to be able to provide life and experience it with dignity. So I want to pause there because there's a lot. I know that I said a lot, but want to first answer any sort of clarifying questions. And then, yes, Ora, please.
I just had a question about the when the months were created, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because now you're applying a month to the beginning, and I didn't have a sense that there were months way in the beginning.
Yeah, right. So it's a great question, right? When we think about Yom Sheni, right, that's the second day. The first day is not called Rishon, right? Because first, right, implies that there's a second. But on day one, there was not day two to be called, right, the first day. So it's one day. So even though there was an understanding that there was going to be, right, we say Seif Masav Machshava Techila, that God had a vision of what conceptually this was going to be in the world of ideas, and that was created first, and then that manifested in the world of action. So in the world of action, you're right, there were not months until they happened, but in the world of ideas, there were. And just to give one other allusion to this concept of things which are backwards, represent Midas Hadin, the Hebrew month, this might blow your minds a little bit. The Hebrew month Tishrei, right, which is the day of judgment, what's the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet? Taf. What's the next to the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet? Shin. What's the next to the last letter of the alphabet? Resh. Tishrei is starting at the end of the Hebrew alphabet, right? Nisan is the Aramaic name, right? The biblical name. Does anyone know? This is extra credit points. Does anyone know what the Torah calls the month of Nisan? It's called Chag HaAviv. Aviv, which represents Midas Hadin, Midas Harachmim, in the right order. Aviv is Aleph, Beis, Beis, right? It's starting in the other end of the Hebrew alphabet and going in the right direction. So when we have things which are going it's not just out of order, it's backwards in order, right? When things are there's this Midas Hadin, and then when it's going the right direction, right, it's Midas Rachmim. So again, the month of Shvat starts with this aspect of the base Hillel, the base Shammai of the strict attribute of judgment, until we get to Tu B'Shvat, and the 15th of the month, it's this shifting. It's shifting from this harshness to this generous resurgence and recalibration. Thank you for that question. Other clarifying questions or questions of curiosity? Chag HaAviv is Eli asked in the chat. Meaning Pesach is called Chag HaAviv, right? Or the season is the Chana.
When is the first time any of the months of the year are mentioned in the? I don't remember at the moment.
Yeah, in the Hebrew Bible, for the most part, they're only given numerical, right, in the 10th month in the right.
Oh, okay.
And so you find this also in the month of Shvat is, I think, called is the 10th month. That it's actually Rosh Chodesh Shvat is the day that Moses starts re-explaining the Torah, right, in Dvarim, that like going over with all of the mishpatim, literally all of the dinim, all of the statutes, all of that starts on Rosh Chodesh Shvat. He, of course, passes away in the following month of Adar. The Zion Adar is Moses's birthday and the day that he dies.
So when did they get their names?
It's a good question. I don't know that there's a consensus. I mean, certainly there's a huge influence, and I think people argue which one influenced which in terms of like the zodiac and Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism. In the zodiac, what corresponds what we call in our tradition the mazel. The mazel of the month of Shvat is the dali. It's the bucket. What is it? I don't know what it is in the zodiac, but I think it's I don't know what they call it. Does anyone know?
Remember. It's a bucket.
The bucket. Does anyone? I don't know. If you don't put it in the chat, right? But they correspond, right? They all correspond. The bucket, of course, right? The dali is a contronym. King David says, "Arumimcha Hashem kidali sani," that I will praise you, God, because kidali sani. It's a hard word to translate. Dali can mean to impoverish, like to be poor. It's also a language of elevation, right? And so the bucket. Aquarius. What is it? Aquarius, right? It's the bucket, right? It's the water. So the feature of the bucket, right? In the Jewish tradition, the dali is a bucket that goes on a rope that you lower into the well, right? It goes down, right? And the going down is meant to help, right, in the elevation that when it comes up with water, right? So it's emblematic of this struggle of, right, going down in order to come up, right? That the empty go down in order to be able to find literally the hydration to be able to be elevated, right? And it's very consistent within. Sefer Yetzirah says it's the letter tzadi corresponds, and we know that the letter tzadi it alludes to the idea of that tzaddik. It's it's the struggle. Ur zeru tzaddik ula yisrael simcha. That for the light is planted for the righteous, and those who are naturally aligned are joyous. So if you're naturally aligned, you can be happy in the moment. But if you're yisrael. But if you're a tzaddik, the tzaddik is two letters. It's the letter nun and the letter yud. The nun represents the nefila, the falling. The yud represents the elevation. So there's this tension. Righteousness is a struggle, right? If it's easy, it's rarely holy, right? Real holiness comes when there's a struggle, right? Yes, Robin.
Yeah. So the way you're explaining this, or the way I'm understanding it, I see a connection between Tu B'Shvat, Purim, and Pesach, and the three of them are like resets. Tu B'Shvat is like a reset in nature, and for Pesach, it's a reset like when no one was meant to be slaves, to reset that, and then Purim like a historical reset, and the things, the way they appear or not the way they are. So am I
Yeah.
getting this right, or am I just making this up?
You're saying more and better than what I was saying, but what you're saying is 100% right. I would just, it's you're saying is absolutely right. We know that Purim is it's a turnabout, right? It's everything gets upended. And Pesach is absolutely, it's a reconfiguration of all that, right? Literally, it's a reordering. The Seder is, right? It's a reordering that normally there's this pardes, is the pshat, the remez, the drosh, and the sod. We take away the pshat, and then you're left with the other three letters in the reverse order that you have to now reorder a society where everybody is welcome and everybody is holy and everybody has a place and everybody is, who's hungry, let them come and eat. So all of that is very true. So Tu B'Shvat is kind of like, it's kind of this underappreciated, almost like pediatric holiday, right? That kids, sing songs. The Svarim in the Svarim that deal with like Musar speak a lot about the custom of eating dried fruits. Not just because historically, like, how else would you have fruits if there's snow on the ground unless they were dried, but really that it speaks to the way in which many people feel at this time of the year, right? The great inspiration of Elul and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot, right? Like Hanukkah already, like, time now is not what it used to be, but even Hanukkah feels like years ago, right? At least for me. It feels like, I don't, and so a person feels exhausted, a person feels spent, a person feels spiritually dehydrated, right? And so there's this custom of eating dried fruits on Tu B'Shvat to say, okay, so you're dry, so get some water, right? So, okay, so there's snow outside, but what you don't understand is below the surface, the sap is already coming into the tree, right? Like there will be another season and there will be another, there will be another spring and things will grow again. Yeah. As a rule, that which, I don't know how to say this, I don't have language for this. As a rule, the superficial things that society artificially values, right? The color of a person's skin, how tall they are, all sorts of whatever the things that society says, this is what the ideal looks like. As a rule, right, that's kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum of truth. And the tradition teaches, not that there's anything wrong if a person happens to, right, but to not give that more value than it's worth. That which is concealed, the rabbis always understood, is that which is the most precious. Because to the extent that it's exposed, that it's, right, imagine like, I don't know, your passport, right? Things that you care about, things which are important, you don't leave lying around. You don't make the things which are really important the most accessible, because if it's really precious, you protect it, you keep it in a safe space. So things which are really valuable, right, are often kept in a safe space. And often those truths are concealed below the surface. And so Tu B'Shvat reminds us that society artificially orders things and prioritizes value in selfish and distorted ways. And historically, this has been a time within the calendar where the deleterious effects of that and the consequences of those types of policies often begin to unravel. Whether it's in Egypt, whether it's in Egypt, whether it's even within ourselves, that the evil inclination tells us our best days are behind us, right? I mean, that's what I think historically for me, Tu B'Shvat has always felt like, right? That like we're celebrating the birthday of the trees, but really it looks like we should give them a eulogy, right? Sometimes you only know that somebody lived because you read about them. We don't think about the trees the whole year. And all of a sudden today we're saying it's their birthday. We look outside and say, oh, they must have had like a nice life, right? It's a shame we didn't get to know them beforehand, right? I mean, that's right. And that is, of course, absurd, right? So it's a day that I think invites us to question those givens that are artificially mass-produced and sold to us, right? Chano.
So I have a kind of another common statement.
Please.
So Tu B'Shvat is, as you mentioned, is called Chag Aviv, which is the spring.
Pesach is, meaning Pesach is called Chag HaAviv. This is Chag HaIlanot.
Chag HaIlanot.
Yeah.
Okay, so Chag HaIlanot, that's like a little bit like Chag HaAviv to me indicates renewal.
Yeah.
Yet we always assume that Tu B'Shvat is some sort of renewal, at least renewal of the trees of nature. So I suppose there's like a renewal of nature as opposed to renewal of us as people. Is that an assumption?
It's not just an assumption. I think it's a good working hypothesis. I think it's a truth. When we think about, so the Arizal, the Zohar famously points out that the word for hateva, right, the nature, it has the same numerical value as the word Elohim. Elohim is God's name for the attribute of mercy, of judgment, and the way it kind of works is that God is concealed in nature. The difference between the languages of mercy and the languages of harsh judgment, Rashi points out, it's the word that goes around with Midas HaRachamim is amira, speech, utterances. It's a soft speech. Diber is a harsh speech, like the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, thou shalt not. It's harsh. When God created this world, God created the world through Midas. God wanted to create the world through Midas Hadin, saw that it wasn't going to happen, Rashi says. It was not going to be sustainable, so God prefaced it through Midas HaRachamim. And the Sfas Emes, I think we spoke about this, that we're still judged. We're judged on our desires and we're judged on our actions. In the world of action, right, which is based Hillel, God judges with mercy. On our desires, our wants, God is very strict. That's the Beis Shammai, and that's the Midas Hadin. Because how do you defend? I want to be obnoxious. I want to be unhealthy. I want to be hard to be with. You want to know why I'm hard to be with? For that, there's a long list, right? You'll meet my parents, you'll meet my grandparents. Like there's a lot that we could all find compassion for each other and why. Right? Even though we want one thing, the reason why we are, for that there's compassion. It's one of the reasons why the Gemara says, in this world we paskin like Beis Shammai, like Beis Hillel. In this world we go like this, but in the next world it's going to be like Beis Shammai. Because here, with the lack of clarity, right, so then there needs to be the space for all of the mistakes that only come around because we don't have the clarity. So when God created this world, God created it through 10 utterances. And the idea was that like God would whisper God's self into this world through creation, and then through the process of seeing nature and seeing the godliness in and the spirituality in nature, that we would come to understand, right? And that's what Abraham did. This is a mountain. This is a beautiful mountain. Who made such a beautiful mountain, right? You see a beautiful mansion. Somebody built the mansion. So who's the owner of this mountain? Who created this mountain? So Abraham was really kind of the first kind of the one able to hear the whispers of God through nature. But like when we didn't get the memo, and not just we as Jews, but like when society didn't get the memo through, right, the enslavement in Egypt, there were the 10 plagues, there was death and destruction, and then there was the 10 commandments. Because if you don't hear it when I whisper, I'm going to have to say it loudly. And if I have to say it loudly, there's going to be some anger there. And there's going to be some harshness in that. And that's what the 10 commandments are, right? It's God's coming out speech, right? It's the divine revelation is God's coming out speech, but there's some failure in needing to have to come out, right? Because if people are really paying attention to who you are, you wouldn't have to have a coming out speech because people know who you are, right? Because they'd be paying attention. They'd be hearing the whispers. So there's an aspect of on Tu B'Shvat, a recognition and a resurgence and a recalibration to the natural order of nature that God had in mind in the 7 days of creation. And then I'll take up more questions. When we think about the trees, God created billions of trees, billions of fish, all of the things in creation were created, each according to their species, billions of them. Ants and birds. The one exception is person, Adam, because there aren't different types of people. Functionally, one person is not more human than another human. There's no such thing. when we think about the core nature of humanity, there's no hierarchy of humanity. There's a hierarchy of creation, right? You've got rocks, right? They don't really have life the way that grass has life, which doesn't have life the way in which bugs have life, which doesn't have life. They don't have life the way in which animals have life, which don't have life the way in which humans have life. But humans, one life is not more valuable than another in terms of being more human. There's no hierarchy there. And that's on the most natural, evolutionary, right? But that's before you get into all of the other complexities. On the most basic, in the most basic space, it is unnatural to prioritize one type of human over another, because within nature, there's only one type of human, and that's all of us. Yeah. Other questions or thoughts? I have not been monitoring the chat, so if anybody asked any questions there, feel free to either let me know to read it out loud, or if anyone wants to say it out loud. It's also a safe space if anyone wants to offer a rebuttal. There are, yeah, please, Chana. Just unmute if you could.
As I said, it's not a rebuttal, it's just thoughts.
We like your thoughts.
So I'm going back to that Ilanot and Chag Aviv.
Yeah.
So they're both they're natural events, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm just trying to understand sort of the significance of Tu B'Shvat being Chag Ilanot, representing like completely nature, but and then while you're moving to Pesach and you were talking about spring, you are using it as a metaphor for human beings, I suppose.
Yeah.
For humanity.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm thinking,
Yeah.
And I just want to say one additional thing in the stuff. So I was talking to someone today about other things, and what she was saying to me was that that supposedly they figured out that human beings, okay, for the past 1,000 years, we are better now than we were 1,000 years ago in terms of our sort of that need to destroy and distract. And I was just wondering how much longer it will take us to really be a decent human being. Anyway, that's where I'm at.
No, it's right. If we haven't figured this out by now, I think it was Einstein maybe who said something like, it'll be a great day when our humanity catches up to our technology. I don't know.
When the Messiah comes, everything will be good.
When the Messiah comes, Mashiach comes. Yeah. No, it's interesting. There are these kind of interesting Gemaras that talk about the future. Says somebody, talks about a certain person had access to understand what happens in the next world. They asked them, and it says there, the world's upside down. It's an upside down. That this world is an upside down world, right? Talking about our world, it's an upside down world. And the mystics speak a lot about the human as a tree that's growing inverted, right? We're growing down, right? If our brain is kind of the roots, right? As the core, and the rest of our body are like the branches and the limbs, but it's growing in the wrong direction. There's a very interesting medrash. It's an esoteric medrash. That's based on a more famous medrash. The medrash says that after Isaac's experience with the binding, he was 37 years old. The next thing that we really hear about him is that he meets his wife, Rebecca. But he was 40. And then during those 3 years, he's actually back in the garden. He's in Gan Eden. That's a more famous medrash. Medrash says that the angels cried and he was harmed in the process. His soul left. He needed to rehabilitate. So it took 3 years to rehabilitate in the thing. The medrash says that when Rebecca sees Isaac, she falls off of her camel or whatever she's riding. And the medrash says the reason why was that because after Isaac had spent 3 years recuperating Gan Eden, he was basically walking on his head. That's what the medrash says, that he was walking on his head. And either that was very strange for her, and she's like, this is the guy I'm going to marry, right? Or she understood and was like, okay, I'll also walk on my head. And so she came off of her thing. There's an idea that if a person if the Adam is Eitz HaSoda, is a tree of the field, right? So then this world's upside down in that, we are prioritizing that which is up is down and down is up, and all of those things of elevation of who's in charge. So there's right in my mind, and this is brought down in other places, Purim prepares us for Pesach. Pesach is the beginning of the calendar year. Pesach prepares for the rest of the year. And the previous Purim is connected to, right? So Tu B'Shvat obviously is exactly a month before Purim. This year it'll be 2 months because we have extra Adar. But right, there's a way in which it's all connected like this, and it's all connected like this, and it's all connected in all of the different ways. Dwellin, and then Joanne.
Well, it's the Festival of the Trees, but don't so many of the other festivals have an agricultural basis originally?
Yeah.
And, we lose sight of that. I think of how important that was, in an agrarian society that was so integrated into their lives on a day-to-day basis. We're so far removed from that, of just how important that integration with nature was.
100%.
Their day-to-day life.
100%, right? We read Ecclesiastes. That's the Koheles, right? I get that limited. We read Koheles on Sukkot, right? Because Sukkot is right after the harvest, right? And when everybody else is coming in because it's getting cold, right? We're going out, right? The reason why we don't have Sukkot in the spring is who doesn't want to sit outside in the spring? It's right. It's only in the fall that we're going out, right? So and only after we collect all of the produce and the harvest in the fall do we need to read about how everything all the physical things are nothing, right? Because it needs to keep us humble, right? So it's very much, and the reason why we have an extra month this year is because every so often we need to plug it to make sure that Pesach still falls in the spring, right? It needs a spring holiday. It's very much dependent on these things. Unlike the Ramadan and the completely lunar Muslim calendar goes through the whole calendar cycle, right? Because it doesn't have the extra solar component that we have. So yeah, that is 100% correct. And there's a lot of there. It is also brought down that on Tu B'Shvat a person should daven for their esrog. If you want to, have a pretty citron for Sukkot, it's brought down that Tu B'Shvat is a good day to pray for it, right? Because that's when your esrog is starting to get its nutrients. So like being part of that process, it's like, starting to write a pen pal, in the first grade who's going to be on a, foreign exchange program in college, right? You're like investing in the relationship. Thank you, Dwellin. Please, is it pronounced? It's Joanne, yeah? Yeah, please, yeah. Just wanted to make sure. Just if you could just unmute,
Sorry.
please.
So this really follows the last 2 points. It seems that in reconnecting us to the season, you talked at the beginning about the artificiality of time as a construct. And so it feels as though partly what's happening in making these connections and reconnecting us to nature is also to reinsert us into the seasons and into an order and form of time that isn't constructed by human beings.
That's right. That is exactly right. That's much better said. You could have saved us 59 minutes Yes, that is exactly right. That is exactly right. That is exactly right. And I think on some level that's why the Mishnah teaches about it in the singular, right? Chag HaElon, right? It's the Rosh Hashanah Le'ilon, right? It's the Rosh Hashanah for the tree. That when we think about humanity, the individual is lost, right? It's often lost, right? Because it's society and it's always in the plural, and people become numbers and people become lost and erased. When you focus on the one, on the singular, that each and every single person is the totality, right? If one person is, we say, and I know people have been davening for me, thank God I'm not that sick, but in davening we say, that sorry, my brain is shutting down, that our brethren Israel who are all sitting in b'tzara, in pain. And the literal translation is that our brethren, all of Israel who is suffering, it's not all those who are suffering within Israel. That when we think about brethren, if we have family that's suffering, we are all suffering because our family is suffering. That's what brethren, right? That's what it means, achenu, right? Our siblings, right? So our siblings who are suffering with all of our family who's suffering, they're suffering because our siblings are suffering, right? So when we think about, there is one person who's sick. There's one person who's sick in the world, right? It's like it's lost now. There's a million cases of COVID today, right? Literally. So it's lost. I think what the Mishnah is trying to remind us is that, like, no pun intended, but right, sometimes when you focus on the tree, right, you actually understand what the forest is, right? Like, right, you want to understand the forest, but you don't understand the complexity, understand every single thing about this one tree, and then you have an understanding perhaps of what the forest is, right? It's not the other way around. Yeah, so it's meant to, to remind us, yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you. I think Ellie, did you have a hand up?
Yeah, sorry. So like I told a little story about something that happened to me in Israel, and one of the reasons why I bring this up is because, like, our tradition has its birthplace in the land of Israel, and our calendar lines up to the climate in that space and the things that happen. I remember when I first came in the summertime, and it was so hot, and then as we reached the fall, and like literally, as you know, after the high holidays, when we changed from saying the dew to saying bring the wind and the rain, like literally that day it rained. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And I mean, I grew up in Northern California, which has a very similar climate. And so, I was kind of privileged to have a lot of things sort of line up so that, like, being in the sukkah in the fall isn't this horrible, uncomfortable thing where you're freezing to death, right? And and when you sing Shaftimayim, it actually does start raining because it's the right season, right?
Yeah, no, there's snow in your sukkah. Yeah.
Right, exactly. You don't have snow on your sukkah, but like, I was finding it interesting listening to how you were describing, like, your experience of Tu B'Shvat, of like the trees all look like they're dead, right? And yet we know that, like, in this season, in late January, early February, generally speaking, is when this is when you start tapping the trees for your maple syrup, right? And for your birch syrup, because that's when the sap is coming up. So, even
Ellie, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but there is a town hall that's starting in 1 minute. So I want to just, I don't want to stop you in your thoughts, but I also want to recognize that there are a lot of people that are going to just hop off, and I don't want them to hop off on that. It feels like it's on you. I'm just going to end with this one final thought, which is that, when we celebrate and we observe MLK Day, it's really worth thinking about the ways in which society often looks at people like the tree that's past its prime, right? And it's not an indicator. When we think about, the work that needs to get done, it really is about bringing it back to the way in which God envisioned it, right? Which is that there's only one type of people, which is human beings. So thank you all so much for being part of this conversation. Good luck at the town hall, and we'll continue, God willing, next month. Take care. Have a good night.